Solene had spent her whole life learning how not to be seen, and she had never needed the skill more than now, standing in a line of the most beautiful daughters in Aldmere, while the cruelest man alive walked slowly toward her. She kept her eyes on the flagstones. She had learned that too, that a lowered gaze made her smaller, and smaller was safer. Around her the other offered daughters stood tall in silk the color of jewels, their chins lifted, their scents blooming through the great hall like a garden opened all at once. Rosewater, warm amber, crushed violet. Each one a banner, an announcement, a plea. Choose me, notice me, spare my house. Selene wore gray. She always wore gray, and she had no scent to speak of at all. That was the whole point of her, really. That was why she was here instead of the sister who was supposed to be. The Hall of Duskhold was built to make you feel like nothing. The ceiling vaulted up into a darkness the torches couldn't reach, and the pillars were black stone worn smooth by 600 years of frightened people filing past them. Banners hung the length of it, all bearing the same mark, the gray wolf of House Ashfell, jaws open, throat exposed in the old sign that meant I fear nothing enough to guard against it. 200 courtiers lined the walls, and not one of them made a sound, because the king was walking the line. King Dane of Aldmere moved the way a landslide moves, slow, and then all at once, and there was no arguing with either speed. He was tall in a way that rearranged a room, broad through the shoulders, and he wore no crown, because a man who had killed 3 challengers in a single winter did not need to remind anyone what he was. His eyes were the flat, pale gray of river ice. When they touched one of the offered daughters, the girl swayed like she'd been struck, and the king moved on without slowing, and a small sound of relief and grief would go up from her family in the crowd. He was not choosing a bride. Everyone in the hall understood that, even if no one dared say it, he was inspecting tribute. The council had ordered it. Take a mate, steady the line, give the realm an heir before it's too late. And the king had agreed the way a wolf agrees to a leash, which is to say he was going to do it and hate every soul who'd made him. Too late. The words drifted through the crowd in whispers. Selene wasn't meant to hear. Before it's too late. No one would say what they meant, but everyone knew the stories. Everyone knew the king's bonded mate had died 4 years ago, and everyone knew what happened to an alpha who lost the one bond a wolf was ever given. He came apart, slowly, from the inside, until the man was gone and only the animal was left. Selene watched his boots come down the line toward her. 1 girl. 2, the swaying, the small grieving sounds, and she thought with a calm that surprised her, he'll pass me. They always pass me. That is the one mercy I can count on in this life. She had been sent here to be passed over. That was the plan. Stand in the line, be forgettable, let the king's eyes slide off her like water off glass, and go home, to the attic room and the ledgers and the long gray quiet. You are insurance, Lady Sethra had said, fixing the plain gray dress with her own hands. Nothing more. Illyra is the one who matters. You are only there, so the king does not think House Ardell insulting. The boots stopped in front of the girl beside her, a daughter of some southern house. Gold-haired, trembling, drenched in orange blossom, the king breathed her. In the way you'd sniff milk you suspected, had turned. His lip curled. He moved on. And then King Dane of Aldmere stepped in front of Selene, and out of pure habit she did the thing she had done 10,000 times, the thing that had kept her invisible her whole life. She breathed out slow, and made herself nothing, and waited for him to leave. He didn't leave. He went still. Not the ordinary stillness of a man pausing. Every predator's stillness she had ever seen, the barn cat over a nest, the hawk on the fence post, had been a stillness pointed outward, at prey. This was different. This was the stillness of a man who has just heard, very faintly, a sound he did not believe existed anymore. His head turned a fraction, his nostrils flared. He breathed her in. And Selene, who had no scent, who had been built by careful hands to have no scent, felt something crack open, low in her chest. Some sealed door she hadn't known was there, and for one terrible instant, the air around her wasn't empty at all. The king's pale eyes went wide. The flat river ice of them shattered into something Celine had never seen on his face, in the stories, or the coins, or the fearful whispers. It was not hunger, it was not cruelty. It was recognition. "You," he said. His voice came out wrecked. Barely a voice at all, like a word dragged up from the bottom of a well. You can't be. She's dead." The bond died. Somewhere in the crowd, a goblet hit the floor and rang like a bell in the silence. 200 courtiers stared. On the dais, the king's beta had risen halfway from his seat, one hand frozen in the air. Down the line, the beautiful daughters in their jewel silks had all turned to look at the girl in gray. The nobody, the insurance. And their faces were masks of pure disbelief, because an alpha got one true mate. One. Ever. And this one had buried his 4 years ago. Celine stopped breathing entirely. This is not happening, she thought, with the last calm corner of her mind. He has made a mistake. I have no scent. I am no one. He will realize it in a moment and be furious, and I am the one who will pay. King Dane took one step closer, close enough that she had to tip her head back to keep her eyes on the flagstones, close enough that she could feel the heat of him like an open hearth. When he spoke again, it was very quiet, and it was only for her, and it frightened her more than the whole silent hall. "What are you?" the ruthless Alpha King whispered. "And why do you smell like the other half of my soul?" A week earlier, Celine had not known she was going to Duskhold at all. She had known only that a rider in Ashfell Grey had come up the North Road in the rain, and that the whole of Ardell Hall had gone quiet the way a house goes quiet when something has arrived that can't be sent away. She'd watched it from the attic window, her breath fogging the cold glass, and she'd felt the old, familiar tug of "not my business," and gone back to the ledgers. Celine kept the books for House Ardell. She had for years. It was the sort of task a family gave to a daughter they had decided to forget. Useful, invisible, endless. She was good with numbers, because numbers didn't look at you strangely and then look away. Numbers didn't lower their voices when you entered a room. Numbers had never once, in her 20 years, asked her father why the girl was so hard to remember, why a guest could sit across from Celine at supper and come morning, recall everyone at the table but her. She was used to it. She had made a kind of home inside it. If you are going to be forgettable, she had decided long ago, you may as well be forgettable on purpose and get some peace out of the bargain. There had been a night, years back, that she thought of more than she liked. A trader, snowed in for the winter, had sat up late by the kitchen fire, talking with her while she mended a harness by lamplight. Really talking. The way people so rarely did with her, until the candle burned down and she'd gone up to the attic warmer than she'd felt in a year. And in the morning he'd looked up from his porridge and said kindly to her face, "And who's this then?" remembering not a single word of the whole long night. Not her name. Not her face. Not that she'd existed at all once the door had closed between them. She had been 11. She had cried until she was sick, and then she had stopped. Because she understood, in the clear, cruel way children sometimes do, that this was simply what she was, and that crying about the shape of your own life was a waste of good salt water. After that, she made her peace mostly. The summons came at dusk. Not to her, never to her, but to the great hall, where her father, Lord Merrick, sat grey-faced at the head of the table, with the king's letter open in front of him, and her stepmother, Lady Sethra, stood behind his chair with her hand on his shoulder like a hawk resting on a glove. Elira was crying. Celine stood in the doorway a while before anyone noticed her, which was to say the usual amount of time. "The king requires an offered daughter of every house of rank," her father was saying, in the flat voice of a man reading his own sentence. "Ours is named. We cannot refuse. To refuse is treason. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. It is not a marriage, Elira. You must understand what it is. The king has not been. The king is not well. Since the Lady Malis died, he has been. He stopped. Some words you did not say aloud, even in your own hall. He'll kill me, Elira whispered. Everyone knows. The daughters he takes into Duskhold. They don't? Papa, please. And here, Lady Sethra spoke, in the smooth, cool voice she used for arranging things. And Celine felt the whole course of the next terrible week turn on it like a key in a lock. Lord Marek looked up. Sethra, the letter names our house, not the daughter. But it is understood. The eldest, the true-born. It is understood, Sethra agreed pleasantly, that House Ardell will send a daughter. It names no one. And House Ardell, she went on, turning at last, unhurried, to look at the doorway where Celine stood, has too. The great hall went quiet. Elira turned, her father turned. And for the first time in longer than Celine could remember, every person in a room was looking directly at her, and she understood exactly why, and she felt the floor drop out of the world. No, Celine said. Her own voice startled her. No, I keep the books. You, Sethra said, crossing to her, and there was almost tenderness in it, which was the worst part, are perfect for it. Think, girl. Think what you are. She took Celine's chin in her cool fingers and tilted her face up to the torchlight, studying it the way you'd study a tool before deciding it would do. The king will pass over you. He passes over everyone he does not want, and he will certainly not want a scentless little ledger keeper in gray. You will stand in the line. He will not choose you. You will come home. And Elira will be safe, and the house will have obeyed, and no one will have died at all. She smiled. It is the kindest thing I have ever arranged. You should thank me. You are insurance, nothing more. Celine looked past her stepmother to her father, who had already dropped his eyes back to the king's letter, because he had, she understood, already agreed. To Elira, who would not meet her gaze either, but whose relief was so plain and so shamed that Celine could not even hate her for it. And if he does choose me? Celine asked. It came out very small. For just a moment, something crossed Lady Sethra's face. A flicker, quickly hidden, that Celine would spend the coming days trying and failing to name. Not doubt, something older. Something almost like fear, though Celine could not imagine what her stepmother had to fear from a plan so certain. He won't, Sethra said. And she said it with such absolute knowledge, such iron certainty, that Celine believed her completely. Trust me, child. I made very sure of that a long time ago. They gave her 2 days to be ready, which was one more than she needed, since she owned almost nothing. On the third morning, a plain-covered cart took her north alone, but for a silent driver in Ardell livery, who did not once, in 3 days of road, look back at her, not out of rudeness, she thought, but because the eye simply had nowhere to catch. She watched the country change, through the gap in the canvas, the tilled valleys giving way to black pine, the pine to bare stone, the sky sinking lower and grayer, the nearer they came to Duskhold, until on the last evening, the king's seat rose out of the fog ahead of them like something the mountain had grown, rather than something men had built. She had expected to be frightened by the sight of it. Instead, she felt, to her own surprise, almost calm, because she had a plan, and her plan was the same plan it had always been: be no one, be passed over, go home. She held to that calm through the gates, through the cold dormitory, where the offered daughters were housed like tribute in a treasury, through the long, sleepless night of the others weeping and praying, while Celine lay dry-eyed in the dark and told herself it would all be over by tomorrow's dusk. She was, she thought, the only girl in that room who wasn't afraid of being chosen. She had never once considered that this might be the thing to fear. At the time, Celine thought it was only cruelty talking. She would remember those words in the great hall of Duskhold, a week later, with the king's shattered pale eyes, 6 inches from her own, and the whole court holding its breath. I made very sure of that a long time ago, and she would feel the first cold finger of a much larger fear, because whatever her stepmother had made sure of, the king of Aldmere had just impossibly undone it with a single breath. They took her out of the great hall so fast, she barely remembered walking. One moment the king was in front of her with his wrecked whisper, "Why do you smell like the other half of my soul?" And the next, his beta was between them. A lean, dark-haired man moving with the smooth speed of someone who had spent years managing a wolf that could not always be managed, and there were guards, and a small stone room that smelled of tallow and old rushes, and then the door was shut, and Celine was alone with the beta and her own hammering heart. "Sit," the beta said, not unkindly. He had the wariest eyes she had ever seen on a man. "Before you fall, you've gone the color of a fish." Celine sat. The stool wobbled. She gripped the edges of it. "I'm going to be executed," she said. It seemed important to say it out loud, to get ahead of it. There's been a mistake. I don't know what happened. I have no scent. Everyone knows I have no scent. And I've made the king look like a fool in front of his whole court. And now, you're not going to be executed." The beta pulled the stool around and sat facing her, close. His voice dropping low. "My name is Tovin. I speak for the king when the king cannot be, when it's better that he doesn't. I need you to answer me plainly and quickly, and I need you to understand that your life may genuinely depend on how well you do it. Can you do that?" Celine nodded. She could not have spoken if she'd wanted to. "What did you do to him?" Tovin asked. "Nothing." It came out cracked. "I swear it. I did nothing. I was standing in the line. I was trying to be unnoticed. I've spent my whole life being unnoticed. I don't know how to do anything, but..." And he stopped, and he smelled me. "And I don't have a scent to..." "That," said Tovin quietly, "is exactly the problem." Something in the way he said it made her go still. Tovin was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, part disbelief, part dawning, terrible hope, and under both of those a fear so deep it made her own seem small. He leaned in. "A wolf's nose does not make mistakes," he said. "Not about this, not ever. An alpha scents his true mate once in his life, if the goddess is kind, and King Dane scented his. Her name was Malus. I stood beside him at their bonding. I stood beside him 4 years ago when she died, and I felt the bond break through the whole pack like a bell cracking, and I watched what it did to him." His jaw tightened. "A bond does not come twice, Celine. It cannot. What he just did in that hall, should not be possible." Then he did not make a mistake. Tovin said it flatly, and it landed like a door closing. "Which means one of two things. Either the goddess has done something she has never once done in all the tellings." He paused. "Or someone lied. Someone hid something. Someone took a thing that should have been impossible to hide and hid it anyway from him, from you, from the whole world, for years." The cold finger touched the back of Celine's neck again. "I made very sure of that a long time ago." She didn't tell him. Not yet. She didn't know why. Only that her stepmother's words were the one thing in this whole spinning nightmare that felt like a card worth holding. And a girl who had survived 20 years by giving nothing away did not hand over her only card to a stranger in a locked room. Tovin watched her not tell him, saw his wary eyes flick over her face, and registered that she'd swallowed something, and to her surprise, he let it lie. "You'll tell me when you're ready," he said almost gently, "or you won't. That's your affair. I've enough to manage without prying secrets out of frightened girls." He looked, under the wariness, bone-tired in a way she recognized from her father's face on his worst nights. 11 daughters have stood where you're standing this last month," he said. "Everyone thought the danger was that he'd want her. None understood it was the other way, that the man they were feeding to the king was the king. Why does it matter so much? she asked instead. So he thinks I'm his mate. He'll realize I'm no one. Let him send me home. I want to go home. And there, for the first time, Tovin looked away from her. You've heard what happens to an alpha who loses his bond, he said. He goes mad. Everyone's heard it. Slowly. Tovin's voice had gone very low. It's slow. That's the cruelty of it. 4 years he's held it back, by sheer will. By killing things that needed killing. By ruling so hard, there was no room left in him to fall apart. But the wolf is winning. I see it more every month. There are mornings, now I look in his eyes, and he isn't. There's less of him there. He looked back at her, and the hope in his face was almost unbearable. The council thinks a new mate might steady him, a political one. Anything to slow the turning. They're wrong. A false bond does nothing. Everyone who knows anything knows that, and I have watched him hate every daughter they've paraded past him for it. He stopped. And then you stood in a line in a gray dress, and for the first time in 4 years, I watched my king's wolf go quiet. Saleen turned that over. Quiet. She repeated. You keep saying it. You make it sound like relief. Everyone out there looked like they'd seen a corpse walk. Because they don't know what I know. Tovin leaned back, and the fear in him gave way to something raw. 3 nights ago I sat with him until dawn, because he would not sleep when he sleeps now. The wolf comes up through the dreams, and he wakes to shredded sheets and no memory of doing it. 2 weeks ago he stopped halfway down a border levee, and stared at his own name on the parchment, like he couldn't recall whose it was. Tovin's voice had gone very low. That's the turning. It comes like a tide, a little further up the sand each night. And one of these mornings there'll be nothing of Dane left above the waterline, only a thing wearing his face, with all his strength, and none of his mercy. I've loved that man since we were boys, and I've promised myself, I'll end it before it ends him. He looked at her, the hope terrible, precisely because it was so unwilling. And then you go quiet in a doorway, and the tide stops. You understand now why I'm not letting you go home? Outside the little room, footsteps, heavy, uneven, coming fast down the corridor, a guard's voice raised, then cut off. Tuvin was on his feet before Saleen understood why, moving to put himself between her and the door. He shouldn't be able to find you in here, Tovin said, and it wasn't to her, it was to himself, and his hand had gone to the knife at his belt. The stone is thick. There's no draft. I chose this room because he shouldn't be able to scent you through. The door opened. King Dane filled it. He had crossed his own castle to reach her, and he had done it, Saleen realized with a lurch, by following his nose, through stone, through a shut oak door, through everything that should have hidden her. His eyes found her past Tovin's shoulder like she was the only lit thing in a dark house. Leave us, the king said to his beta. Dane, leave us. And under the words, low, was a second sound, a sound no human throat should make, a rumble that raised every hair on Saleen's arms and told her, more plainly than anything Tovin had said, exactly how much of the man was still in charge in there, and exactly how little time was left. Tovin left. He did not want to, Saleen could see that. He backed to the door, with his eyes on his king the whole way. The way you'd back away from a fire that had jumped its grate. But he left, and the heavy door swung shut, and Saleen was alone with the ruthless Alpha King of Oldmere in a room barely big enough for the both of them. She stood. It seemed wrong to sit. Sitting was for people who were safe. King Dane did not come closer. That surprised her. He stopped just inside the door, and he pressed one hand flat against the stone wall, as though he needed it to stay upright, and he shut his eyes, and he simply breathed her in, long and slow and shaking, like a man who had been drowning for 4 years and had just without warning been given air. When he opened his eyes, some of the terrible wildness had gone out of them. Not all, but enough that the thing looking at her was mostly a man again. You're afraid of me, he said. His voice had steadied. It was low and rough and unhappy. Good. You should be. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make you feel better. He dragged a hand down his face. Do you know what you are to me? Your beta says. Soline's mouth was dry. He says you think I'm your... That I don't think it. The rumble came back into his chest, and he visibly forced it down. I know it. The way you know your own name. The way you know which way is down. When I lost Malus, I lost T. He stopped, and something moved across his face that she would not have believed that face could hold. Grief, plain and human and old. There is a hole where the bond was. 4 years I've carried it, and you walked into my hall smelling of gray wool and cold ledgers, and nothing at all. And the hole, his voice dropped, wondering, appalled. The hole went quiet, for the first time. You are standing there, being no one on purpose. I can see you doing it. And my wolf has stopped screaming for the first time since she died. Celine didn't know what to do with any of it. So she said the true thing, because she had nothing else. That's not possible, she said. I'm scentless. I've been scentless my whole life. It's why no one. It's why I'm the one they sent. Because the plan was that you would never choose me. My stepmother promised them you'd never choose me. She said, and then she stopped, because she heard her own mouth about to give away the card, and it was too late. He had already gone rigid. She said what? Dane said, very quietly. Celine's pulse roared. And then, because she was so tired, suddenly, of holding everything so close, and because for the first time in her life someone was looking at her like she was the most important thing in the room, and not the least, she said it. She said she'd made very sure of it. A long time ago. The words came out shaking. She said it like it was a thing she'd done. To me, the king went so still that she thought for a wild moment that he'd stopped breathing altogether. When he spoke, each word was carved. You have no scent, he said slowly, because someone took it from you. That's not... A wolf is born with a scent, Celine. It is the first thing we have and the last thing we lose. There is no such thing as a scentless wolf. There is only a wolf whose scent has been bound, hidden, sealed, buried under something, and that is old magic, cruel magic, the kind that takes a scent witch and a great deal of will and a reason. His pale eyes burned into her. Someone bound you as a child. Someone made you forgettable on purpose. Someone spent 20 years making certain that no wolf alive would ever catch what you are. His breath came ragged. And they very nearly succeeded. If you had stood one pace further down that line, if the draft had gone the other way, I would have passed you by like all the rest, and I would have gone into the dark, and I would never have known that the one thing that could have saved me was standing 10 feet away in a gray dress. Soline put a hand out to the wall. Her whole life, every guest who forgot her by morning, every eye that had ever slid past her without once catching, every year in the attic with the ledgers, being useful, being nothing, being safe, none of it hers, none of it her. A thing done to her, on purpose, by the woman who tilted her face up to the torchlight and called it kindness. Why? She whispered. Why would anyone? That, said King Dane, is the only question that matters now. Because whoever did it to a child had a reason, and reasons like that do not go away. They wait. He pushed off the wall. He crossed the small room, slowly, giving her every chance to flinch back. And when she didn't, he stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of him again, close enough that she saw his hand shake, just slightly, before he mastered it. The one that emptied great halls, because I will not lie to you and I will not let anyone else lie to you either, and you have had enough of that for one lifetime. So, here's the truth, all of it. He held up one finger. You are my mate. The bond is real, and it is waking, and I can feel the binding on you cracking already, which means the person who bound you will feel it too, soon, if they haven't. You are not safe anywhere in Aldmere tonight, least of all in the house you came from. A second finger. I am dying. The turning has begun, and left alone it will take me by winter. And when the man is gone, the wolf will not remember that it ever loved anything, and it will not be kind. His jaw worked. You are, as far as any lore knows, the only thing in the world that can stop it. Not a false bond, not a council marriage, you, which is a monstrous thing to put on a stranger, and I know it, and I'm putting it on you anyway, because I have run out of gentler options. He drew a breath. And the third truth, he said, is the worst one. To wake the bond fully, to seal it, to save my life, is not a thing I can do to you. It has to be chosen. And every telling I have ever heard says the same thing about a bond woken from a binding, as deep as yours. His pale eyes held hers, and for the first time there was something in them that was almost pleading. It says the breaking of the binding may cost the one who was bound. That pulling you fully into the bond could pull you into whatever it was meant to keep you from. I don't know what that is. Neither do you. Someone made very sure of that. The torch guttered. Somewhere far off in the great dark castle, a wolf was howling, and Solene understood, with a fresh drop of the stomach, that it was no wolf at all. It was the king's own kind, his pack, keening at something in the air they could feel changing. So, King Dane of Aldmere, the cruelest man alive, the man who feared nothing enough to guard against it, looked down at the forgotten sister in the gray dress and asked her the first real question anyone had asked her in 20 years. I can send you home to the people who erased you, and I will most likely be dead by the first snow. Or you can stay, and we can wake a thing that neither of us understands, that someone was willing to steal a child's whole life to prevent, and it may save me, and it may cost you everything. His voice dropped. I have no right to ask. Which do you choose? And Solene? Nobody. Insurance? The ledger keeper in gray, who had spent her whole life learning how not to be seen, realized that she was, for the very first time, being given a choice that was entirely and only hers. She opened her mouth to answer. And that was the moment the screaming started in the courtyard below. The screaming came from the courtyard, but the danger came from the man in the room, with her. Solene felt it before she understood it. The air changed, sickened, went hot and close, and King Dane's head snapped toward the door, and something moved under his skin. Not a shift. She'd been raised among wolves and knew the smooth rearrangement of a true shift. This was worse. This was a man being pushed out of his own body, from the inside, his shoulders bunching wrong, his fingers curling, his lips peeling back off teeth that had gone too long, and his pale eyes drowning, going flat and animal and gone. Her voice shook. He didn't hear it. Whatever was happening in the courtyard had lit something in him, and her own scent cracked open, leaking, blooming out of her for the first time in 20 years, was pouring fuel on it. She could smell herself now, so could he. And the wolf that had gone quiet in the great hall was not quiet anymore. It had caught the source of the thing it wanted, and it was coming for her. The door burst open, and Hovin was there, and he took one look at his king and threw himself bodily between them. Dane, Dane, look at me, not her, at me. He got both hands flat on the king's chest and shoved, and it was like shoving a wall. The king didn't move, his ruined gaze sliding past Hovin to fix on Solene with a hunger that had nothing human left in it. Tovin snarled over his shoulder, her scents coming off her in waves, and it's hitting him like, girl, get behind me and keep breathing. Do not run. If you run, he chases. Solene did not run. She had spent her whole life learning to be still when frightened. It was at last good for something. She pressed her back to the cold stone and made herself the smallest, quietest thing in the room, and she reached, without deciding to, without knowing how, for that cracked open place in her chest, and she thought, absurdly, at the drowning wolf across the room. It's all right, I'm here. And the king stopped. His flat animal eyes blinked. Once. Slowly, the wrongness strained out of his shoulders, out of his hands. The teeth receded. He staggered, caught himself on the wall, and when he looked up, the man was back in his face, appalled, gray, drenched in sweat. Out there, he rasped. What? A stable boy. Tovin hadn't taken his hands off him. He's alive. He'll keep the scars. It wasn't you. One of the young ones caught her scent through the courtyard and lost his head. We've got him chained. He didn't say the rest. He didn't have to. And it nearly was you. It nearly was you, on her, and there'd have been no chaining that. Later, after the physicians, after the chained boy was carried off howling, after the offered daughters were quietly sent home to their relieved houses with the fiction that the king had made no choice, Celine sat in a small warm room, high in dust cold. That was she understood. Now hers, and Tovin laid it out plain. He said. That's the turning up close, when something sets it off, and your waking scent is going to set it off, again and again, until the bond is either woken all the way or torn out by the root. There's no standing still in the middle. Not anymore. You cracked the seal in that room downstairs, and it will not reseal. He rubbed his face. So here's the shape of it. The nearer you are to him, the calmer his wolf. You saw that too. You stopped him, none of us could have. But your scent unbound is a torch in a dry field, and the further off you go, the more it'll roam, and the worse he'll get. Which means the safest place in Aldmere for everyone, king and castle and you, is at his side. Close, anchoring him, a grim, almost smile. The council wanted him mated to steady the line. They're going to get their wish in a shape none of them will like at all. So the arrangement was made, the way such things are made when no one has a better idea, and the alternative is a dead king. By day, Celine kept near him, in his council, at the edge of his war room, a gray shape in a corner that the wolf could scent and settle to. By night, she slept in the room adjoining his, the connecting door left open, so that the anchor never fully slipped. The court did not know what to make of her. She heard the whispers. She had always heard whispers, one of the small advantages of being overlooked. For people spoke freely, in front of a thing they didn't quite register. The scentless one, the Ardle girl. He keeps her by him like a hound. None of them guessed mate, because a mate was impossible. And so the truth walked among them unseen, which suited Tovin fine. Let them think what keeps them frightened of you, he told her. Frightened is safe. Understood is not. It should have been unbearable. He was the cruelest man alive. She had watched him nearly become something with no name at all. Instead, on the third night, she heard him awake through the open door, the particular restless silence of a man whose body will not let him rest. And before she thought better of it, she said into the dark, "You could try counting the beams. There are 41. I counted them today instead of listening to your generals argue about grain." A long pause. Then, from the other room, low and dry and genuinely startled, "There are 42. There are 41. One's hidden behind the banner. There are 42. And I know because my father made me count them, the day he named me heir." He said a king should know the true number of things, not the easy one. Something almost like warmth crept into the flat voice. He also said never to argue with a woman about a number she's already decided. So, 41. As you like, you just told me it's 42. I told you what my father said. I didn't say he was right about everything. And then King Dane of Aldmere, the man who feared nothing enough to guard against it, laughed. Rough and surprised and rusty, like a sound he'd forgotten the shape of. And Celine lay very still in the dark and felt something in her own chest turn over, warm and dangerous, and thought, oh no. She was still smiling at the ceiling when it started. At first she thought it was the cold, a prickling at the back of her skull, spreading down her spine. Then the room went thin around her, the way the great hall had gone thin the instant he'd breathed her in, and the cracked open place in her chest yawned wider, and Celine smelled. Not tallow, not stone. Not herself, wood smoke and crushed herbs, and a stranger's hands. The ceiling was gone. She was small. She was so small, held down on a cold table by hands that were not her mother's. And there was a voice chanting low, and there was a smell of burning hair and a circle of candle flame guttering in a wind that shouldn't be there, and a face was leaning over her hooded, close. The hands working something into her skin that took and took and took until there was nothing left of her to smell at all. Celine! She came back with a wrench. She was on the floor of her little room. The connecting door was open, and King Dane was on his knees beside her, not touching her, his hands hovering, his face white, with a fear she'd have thought impossible on him. "You screamed," he said hoarsely. "You stopped breathing." "What did you see?" Celine stared up at him, her whole body shaking. 20 years of quiet peace, cracking apart under her like river ice in spring. "Someone," she whispered. "Someone was leaning over me. I was a baby. And they were taking my scent out of me. I could feel it leaving. And their face," her voice broke. "Their face was hooded. But their hands, Dane, I saw their hands. And I know those hands. I've seen them my whole life." She would not say whose hands. Not that night. Some knowledge is too large to lift all at once, and Celine set it down carefully at the edge of her mind, and did not look directly at it, the way you don't look directly at the sun, but she couldn't keep it from the bind-keeper. Yenna came the next morning, summoned by Tovin from wherever such women were kept. A wisp of an old woman, small and sharp-eyed, with fingers stained yellow and brown from a lifetime of handling the things that give and take away scent. She was the last of the castle's scent-lorists, and she looked at Celine the way a jeweler looks at a stone someone claims is glass. "Sit still, child," she said, "and let me read what's on you." And she laid her stained old hands on either side of Celine's face, and shut her eyes, and went so quiet that the fire seemed loud. When she opened them again, the color had gone out of her. "Well," Yenna said. She sat back. Her hands were trembling, very slightly, and she folded them to hide it. She was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again, it was carefully. The way a person speaks who is choosing which of several frightening things to say first. "In 60 years I have unbound children hidden from cruel fathers, and I have muted young wolves whose scents came in too strong to bear. And I have never once seen work like what is on this girl." She looked at Tovin. She looked at the king, who stood by the window with his arms crossed and his jaw set, listening. Whoever laid this binding was not hiding her from the world. "Majesty. That's the thing I need you to understand. A common binding smears a scent, dulls it, makes it easy to overlook. This does not do that. This is precise. This was built like a lock built to a single key. It hides her completely from one kind of nose." The room went still. "Say it plainly," Dane said. "A wolf could not scent her," Yenna said. "By design, only a wolf." Humans forgot her, because a wolf's binding bleeds a little into the human mind too, but that's spillage, an afterthought. The purpose of this work, the whole cruel heart of it, was to make certain that no shifter alive would ever catch what she is. Her yellow-stained finger came up and pointed, not unkindly, at the king. "And a binding, this fine, is not laid to hide a girl from wolves in general. It is far too much labor for so wide a net. It is laid to hide a girl from a particular wolf." She let that sit. "They hid her from you, Majesty, from the throne. Someone spent a fortune of forbidden craft, 20 years ago, to make certain that the true mate of the future Alpha King would never once, in all her life, cross his nose." Celine's blood had run to ice. She looked at the king and found him looking at her, and she watched him arrive at the same place she had. 20 years ago, Dane said slowly, "I was a boy. My father held the throne. No one could have known I'd be the one to—" He stopped. "Unless they meant to be certain of it, whoever I turned out to be. Unless the point was never me. The point was the crown. Keep the king. Whoever he is, mate fallen. Keep him weak. Keep him, his voice dropped. Keep him turning. That magic died with the old scent covens, Yenna said quietly. And now she did not bother to hide the fear. Burned out 3 generations back, every last circle of them, for doing exactly this kind of thing. It should not exist. And yet here it sits, fresh as the day it was laid on this child's skin. She rose, gathering her shawl, suddenly looking very old. Someone kept the old craft alive in secret. Someone patient. Someone who has been playing a game longer than this girl has been alive. And, Majesty, she paused at the door. The binding is cracking now all on its own, because the bond woke it. Which means, whoever laid it, will feel it crack. The way you'd feel a tripwire go in a room you left guarded. They know she's waking. They have always known where she was. And they will not want 20 years of work undone. She left them in a silence, like the bottom of a well. At the threshold, she turned back once, and her sharp old eyes went to Celine, and softened by a fraction. For what it is worth, child, and it may be worth nothing where you're going. A cent, this precious to hide, is a cent worth a great deal to someone. You were never worthless, you were hoarded. Try to remember, there's a difference. And then she was gone, her slow footsteps fading down the stone, leaving the word hoarded to settle over Celine like a second skin. Celine found she was on her feet, without remembering standing. Dane crossed to her, slowly, the way he always moved near her now, giving her the room to flinch that she never took, and stopped close. And for a long moment, neither of them said the enormous thing. "You know whose hands," he said finally. "Not a question. I've served her supper my whole life," Celine whispered. "She fixed my collar the morning they sent me here. She told me she'd made very sure of it a long time ago." I thought she meant she was cruel. A terrible laugh caught in her throat. She meant she was the one holding the candle over the table. She sat down hard on the edge of the hearth because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her. 20 years rearranged themselves behind her eyes, in the space of a breath. Every kindness her stepmother had ever shown her, which had been few and cold, and every one of them, she saw now a kind of maintenance. The way Sethra had always been the one to bathe her as a child, when the maids were sent away. The way Sethra had touched her face at odd moments over the years, fingertips light along her jaw, and Celine had flinched and thought it dislike. It hadn't been dislike. It had been a woman checking her work. Testing the seams of a thing she'd built to hold. "She wasn't ignoring me all those years," Celine said, hollow. "She was guarding me. I was never the forgotten daughter. I was the buried one. There's a difference, isn't there? One of them means nobody cared," her voice cracked. "The other means somebody cared very much that I stayed exactly where they put me." His hand came up. He didn't touch her, hovered the way he had on the floor of her room, and then, when she didn't pull away, he laid it very gently against her cheek, and Celine felt the warmth of it go through her, like the first hot drink after a day in the snow. "Whoever she serves," he said, low. "Whatever this is, you are not going back to it. Not while I breathe. Do you understand me? You've spent your whole life being someone's tool. That's over. That's over, Celine." She looked up at him. He was close. His pale eyes weren't ice anymore. They were something molten, and the bond between them was a live, humming, aching thing, pulling her up onto her toes, and his gaze dropped to her mouth, and she felt his breath change, and then he flinched back from her like she'd burned him. "No," he said, rough to himself as much as her. He turned away, dragged a hand through his hair. "I won't. You should know what you'd be choosing before I let you choose it. Ask me what I'm afraid of. Go on." "Everyone thinks the king fears nothing." A bitter breath. "Ask me, what are you afraid of?" Celine said softly. He didn't turn around. "I had one mate before you," he said. I loved her the way the tide loves the shore with no choice in it at all. And I watched her die, and it broke something in me that has been eating me alive for 4 years. And now the goddess, or fate, or some scheme I don't yet understand, has handed me a second one, which cannot happen, which has never happened. His shoulders were rigid. And every telling says waking a bond buried this deep might kill you to do it. So, here is what I am afraid of, Celine. I am afraid I have finally been given a reason to live, and that saving myself means burying a second woman. He stopped. He would not say it. I would rather turn. He said instead, very quietly, "Then be the thing that ends you." For 2 days, he was gentle with her, and it was almost worse than the cruelty would have been, because she could feel him deciding. Sully knew the shape of it before he did anything, because she had spent her whole life reading rooms she wasn't allowed to speak in. She watched the king go careful around her. Careful the way you handle a thing you've already decided to set down. He stopped meeting her eyes across the war room. He took his meals apart. At night, through the open connecting door, she heard him not sleeping, and twice, she almost went to him, and twice something in the set of the silence told her not to. Once, in those 2 days, he faltered. She'd been reading by the fire in his study. He let her read. Now had a boy bring up books without either of them ever remarking on it, and she'd looked up to find him watching her, from across the room, with an expression so naked, so hungry and grieved at once, that she'd gone still under it like prey. For a moment, she thought he'd cross the room. For a moment, she wanted him to so badly it frightened her. Then he'd mastered his face, the shutters coming down one by one, and said only, "You should sleep," and left her there with the fire and the ache of it. She understood, later, that she had watched him say goodbye. He simply hadn't told her yet. Yenna came again, and each time she left graver. On the third visit she did not soften it. The binding fights the bond every hour now, the old woman told them both. In the king's study, with the maps of Oldmere spread out around them, like a country waiting to see who would keep it. Every time it cracks, the child sees, and every time she sees. Tss. You felt her stop breathing. That will happen again, and worse. To wake the bond fully, to seal it and save the king, the binding must not crack, but shatter, all at once. She looked between them with terrible steadiness. I have read the old accounts. When a binding this deep shatters, whatever it was raised to hold back comes through with it, and this one was raised by someone who wanted her hidden badly enough to use dead men's magic to do it. I cannot tell you what comes through. I can only tell you that the person who built this trap built it to spring. She folded her stained hands. It may seal the bond and save you both, or the shattering may take her, and I do not know which, and I will not pretend to. That is the truth, and you asked me for nothing but the truth. Celine opened her mouth to say, "I choose it. I already chose. It's mine to choose." And King Dane stood up from the maps and said, in the flat voice that emptied great halls, "No," the word fell like a portcullis. "Dane," Tovin started. No, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I've heard enough, thank you, Yenna. You'll be seen to." And he turned to the window, with his back to the room, and Celine watched the tide come up in him. Not the wolf this time, but the man deciding to drown quietly so no one else would have to. They cleared the room. And then it was just the two of them. And the maps, and the fire. "You don't get to do this," Celine said. Her voice was low and it shook. "You told me it was over, being someone's tool, someone deciding for me. 2 days ago you said that. And now you're standing there deciding I'm too precious to be allowed to choose to save your life. Because I have done this before." He rounded on her, and for one instant the wolf flared gold in his eyes, and then he crushed it down, breathing hard. "I have already stood over one grave I dug by loving someone. I will not dig a second. You think this is about the crown? Let the crown rot. Let me turn. Let them chain me in the deep of dusk cold and forget my name. I would take that, gladly. 1,000 times, before I would stand in this room and bet your life on old women's guesses to save my own. It's not yours to bet, she said. It's mine. Then I forbid it, he said. It is the one thing left that I can still do as king. I forbid it, and I am sending you somewhere she cannot reach you, and you will live, and you will be free, and you will forget me the way you were built to forget everyone. That's the one mercy in what they did to you. Celine, you'll forget me inside a year. I won't, she whispered. You will? They stood a pace apart, both of them shaking. The bond a raw humming wire, strung tight between them, and Celine did the thing she had never once done in 20 years of being nobody. She closed the distance. She crossed the space he'd been so careful to keep, and she took the front of his shirt in both fists, and she pulled him down and kissed him. He went still, that whole-body predator, stillness, and then a sound broke out of him, low and wrecked, and his hands came up and framed her face, like she was the only warm thing in a cold world. And for one endless moment, the king of Altmere kissed her back like a man coming home from a war no one had known he was fighting. She felt the bond flare, bright and gold and right, felt the cracked place in her chest bloom open toward him, felt, for the first time in her whole erased life, entirely, completely seen. Then he tore himself away. He stepped back and back again, until the maps of his kingdom were between them, and his chest was heaving, and his eyes were wet and furious and closed against her. That's exactly why, he said, ragged. That is exactly why I can't. He turned to the door and his voice came out as the king's again, cold and final and carrying to the guards in the hall. Take Lady Celine to the Eastern Tower tonight, and at first light, escort her under guard to the Abbey at Fenmore, where the binding will hold her quiet and no wolf will find her. She is not to be admitted to my presence again, by my order. Dane, by my order. It cracked down the middle on the last word, and that crack was the only thing that told her it cost him anything at all. The guards came. Celine did not fight them. There was nothing to fight. He'd taken the fight and swallowed it whole. She let them turn her toward the door, and at the threshold, she looked back one last time at the ruthless Alpha King standing alone among the maps of everything he ruled and could not save. And she said, quietly, so only he would hear, you told me I'd spent my whole life being what other people decided. And the moment I finally wanted to decide something for myself, you took it away, just like she did. Her voice broke. You're not protecting me, Dane. You're just the last person in a long line who couldn't stand to let me be a person. She saw the words, land. She saw him flinch, as though struck. For one breath she thought it might be enough. Thought she saw his hand rise half-reaching. Thought the whole terrible order might yet come apart in his mouth. It didn't. He closed his hand into a fist and let it fall, and turned his face to the maps, and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. Then the door closed between them, and the King of Aldmere was on the other side of it, and Solon was alone in the corridor with 2 guards, and the cold. She let them walk her toward the Eastern Tower, one hand on each of her arms, gentle enough, even her jailers, it seemed, could not quite hold on to why she mattered, and she did not weep, because weeping about the shape of her own life was a waste of good salt water. Somewhere far below in the dark of duskhold, a chained young wolf began, once more to howl, and Celine thought, with the last clear corner of her mind, he'll be down there beside it before the winter's out, and there'll be no one left who remembers I ever kept him from it. They put her in the Eastern Tower to wait for dawn, and by midnight, Celine understood that dawn might be too late for both of them. It started as an ache, the same hollow pull she'd felt whenever he left a room, only now it did not ease, because he was not coming back. It deepened as the candle burned down. By the small hours it had teeth. The cracked open place in her chest, the place his nearness had soothed, was tearing wider with every hour of distance, and through it, faint, and then not faint at all, she could feel him. She could feel the king turning. It came to her the way weather comes, a pressure and a wrongness she had no words for, rolling up through the torn seam of the half-woken bond. His wolf rising, with nothing left to anchor it, the man beneath going under. She pressed her hands to her chest and gasped with the shared weight of it, and thought, wildly, this is what he's been carrying alone for 4 years. And then the vision took her. She was small again, on the cold table, but this time the binding was cracking as she watched, and she saw more. She saw the hooded figure straighten and lower the hood, and it was a younger Sethra, unlined, terrible, her stained fingers still glistening. She saw Sethra turn to speak to someone in the dark of that long-ago room and heard her own stepmother's voice, cool and satisfied. It's done. He'll never send her now. Not this one, not ever. The line stays broken. And then, to the shape in the dark lower, and should the boy grow up and take some chosen bride to quiet himself, a chosen mate can steady a wolf near as well as a true one, for a while, then she can be dealt with in her turn. We leave nothing to soothe him, nothing at all. Celine came out of the vision with a cry, on her knees on the tower floor, and the truth sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. Malus had not died. Malus had been removed. 4 years ago, when the king's chosen wife began, against all the coven's planning, to calm his wolf and hold back the turning, they had killed her for it and let Dane believe it was chance. Grief was fuel. A king eating himself alive from the inside was exactly the king they wanted. Sethra had buried the true mate as an infant and murdered the chosen one as a bride, and for 4 years the whole realm had watched the Alpha King come apart and called it grief, when it had been engineering all along. No, Celine said to the empty tower. And then, louder, on her feet now, though her legs shook. No, the door was barred from the outside. She threw herself against it anyway, and it opened. And Tovin was there, white-faced, with Yenna behind him. He's turning, Tovin said, without preamble, full and final. Pulling you away did it. I told him, and he wouldn't hear it. He's in the deep hall, and he's not answering to his name, and in an hour there'll be no calling him back. He looked at her, this hard, wary man, and something in him broke open. I came to let you run. It's what he ordered. Get you to Fenmore before the end so at least you'd live. He shook his head. But you're already halfway to the door, aren't you? He didn't lose Malus, Tovin. Celine's voice was steady now, steadier than it had ever been in her life. She was taken from him by the same hand that buried me. And he's spent 4 years believing he's a monster who couldn't save her, and it's a lie, and it's the lie that's killing him. She stepped past him into the corridor. Take me to him. It could kill you. The shattering. I know what it could do. She had known since that first night in the little stone room, since he'd knelt in the dark and given her the first real choice of her life, and she realized, already made it there, and simply not let herself say it. I've spent 20 years being kept small and safe by people who decided it for me. I would rather die choosing than live hidden, that's mine to say. Nobody's said it for me, and nobody's going to. She looked at Yenna. Can you shatter it? When I tell you. The old bind-keeper studied her for a long moment. Child, she said quietly, I can crack the shell, but a binding like this doesn't truly break from the outside. It broke you inward, made you complicit. 20 years you've helped it hold. Every time you made yourself nothing. Every time you chose the corner, and the gray dress, and the lowered eyes. The magic feeds on your own smallness. Her stained hand closed briefly over Celine's. I can strike the lock, only you can refuse to keep it shut. They ran. The deep hall of Duskhold was where the Ashfell kings had always gone to be alone with the worst of themselves, and Celine smelled it before she saw it. Blood and rage and something scorched. Dane was at the far end, on all fours, and he was not a wolf and not a man, but the horror in between. Half-shifted, wrong, his pale eyes gone wholly gold and empty. 2 guards lay groaning by the wall. When the door opened, his ruined head swung toward her, and there was nothing in it that knew her. Dane, Celine said. He snarled and gathered to spring. And Solene, who had spent her whole life learning to be still and small and unseen when frightened, did the opposite of everything she had ever taught herself. She let go of the corner. She let go of the gray. She reached down into the cracked place in her chest, and she stopped holding it shut, stopped being nothing. And for the first time in 20 years, she let herself be entirely, blindingly present. And her true scent, unbound at last by her own will, rolled out of her and filled the hall like sunrise filling a valley. The half-turned king froze. "There you are," Selene whispered, walking toward the thing that could kill her. "Unafraid, unhidden, seen. There you are. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "Yenna?" Her voice rang out now. The old woman struck the lock, and Selene, of her own will, refused to keep it shut. The binding shattered. It went out of her like a scream she'd been swallowing for 2 decades, and the pain was enormous, white and total, and through it came the bond, waking, blazing, gold, slamming into place between her and the wolf across the hall like 2 halves of a broken thing remembering they were one. Dane shuddered. The gold drained out of his eyes and the gray came back. The man came back, dragging himself up out of the animal by the rope she had thrown him, and he crossed the hall and caught her as her knees gave, and they went down together onto the cold stone wrapped around each other, both of them shaking, both of them weeping, both of them impossibly alive. "You came back," he said into her hair, over and over. "You came back, you came back, you never lost her." Solene got out. "Dane, you didn't fail her." "Listen to me." But there was no time to tell it, because the bond was seared open now and screaming to be finished, and he pulled back to look at her, and whatever he saw in her face, chosen, unafraid, wholly present, wholly hers, undid the last of his restraint. He kissed her, like the tide taking the shore, with no choice in it at all, and the deep hall fell away, and there was only the 2 of them, and the gold thread pulling tighter and tighter until at the height of it, when there was no smallness left in her to hide behind, the bond simply chose them both. It snapped whole. It settled into her chest, warm and golden and permanent, a second heartbeat that was his, and she felt him, at the other end of it for the first time, the whole of him, grief and fear and fierce unlooked-for joy, and she reached back down the thread and claimed him in turn, marking him hers the way the bond had marked her his. The thing no one had ever let her claim, complete, sealed, seen. She was still wrapped in his arms, still half drowned in the golden hum of him, when she felt the temperature of the deep hall drop 10 degrees, and Dane went rigid against her, and a cool, satisfied, terribly familiar voice spoke from the shadows by the door. "Well," said Lady Sethra, "you've saved me a great deal of trouble, girl. 20 years I've kept you sealed for exactly this, and here you've cracked yourself open and walked my finished weapon right into the king's arms." She stepped into the torchlight and she was smiling. "Now I only have to close my hand." Selene knew, the instant Sethra stepped into the light, why the shattering had been a trap. She could feel it now through the newly whole bond, a second thread, thin and cold and old, running out of the base of her spine into the dark toward her stepmother. The binding had never been only a seal, it had been a leash. And in shattering it, Solene hadn't cut the leash. She'd woken it, woken the hand that held it. "The old covens didn't die," Sethra said, unhurried, circling. She looked exactly as she always had, cool, contained, arranging things. "We hid. We buried ourselves the way I buried you. And we made ourselves useful to the great houses that burned us. And we planned. The Wolf Kings took everything from my people. So we took the one thing a Wolf King cannot live without." Her cool eyes moved to Dane, and her smile sharpened. "His bond. Buried at birth, every true mate we could find and seal. A generation of alphas, reaching all their lives for something they'd never find. Going feral one by one while the realm called it grief and lit candles." She tilted her head. "You were my finest work, child. And Melis, She said it lightly, watching Dane. Melis was simply housekeeping. She calmed him. She was slowing things down so. The sound Dane made was not human. He came off the floor with the bond blazing gold in his eyes, but this time it was not the turning. This time the man and the wolf moved together whole, and Solene understood in a flash of the shared bond that this was what he had never let himself be. Not a man drowning the wolf, not a wolf devouring the man. Sethra lifted one stained hand, and the cold thread down Celine's spine went taut, and agony drove her to her knees. "Aha," Sethra said to the king. "One more step, and I put out her heart like a candle. I can, you know. She's still bound to me at the root. She opened the door herself. She belongs to the leash." She looked down at Celine with something almost like fondness. "You always did what you were made to do, girl. Made yourself small. Kept yourself hidden. Every day of your life, you helped me hold you. Be a good tool now, and be still, and I'll make it painless, and I'll have my feral king after all." And there, on her knees, the cold thread hooked through her spine, the pain white behind her eyes. Celine almost did it. It would have been so easy. It was the most practiced thing she knew. Go small, go quiet, go still, let someone else decide. 20 years had carved the groove of it, so deep she could have slid into it in her sleep. Instead, she lifted her head. "No," she said. "Solene, you told me once. You'd made very sure of me, a long time ago." Her voice shook, and then it stopped shaking. "You didn't hide me from the world because I was worthless. You hid me because I was dangerous to you." Yenna said it, and I didn't understand. I wasn't forgotten. I was hoarded. You spent 20 years and a fortune of dead magic to keep one scentless girl in a corner, and you only do that to a thing you're afraid of. She got one foot under her. The thread screamed. She rose anyway. "The leash only holds because I keep making myself small enough to fit it, and I'm done being small. Do you hear me? I am done. I take up room now. I have a name, and it's Solene Ashfell, and I am the king's true mate, and I am seen." The cold thread snapped. She felt it go, felt her own refusal, sever it at the root, because a leash needs a neck willing to lower into it, and she would never lower hers again. Sethra's face went white with the first real fear Solene had ever seen on it. The stained hand faltered. "That's not," Sethra breathed. "You can't simply—" "She just did," said King Dane of Aldmere. He crossed the hall. He did not turn, and he did not rage. He moved cold and clean and whole, and that was more terrible than any snarl. Sethra flung the old magic at him, a wave of the muffling, forgetting dark that had erased Solene's whole life, and it broke over the king, and did nothing because he had a true bond blazing in his chest now. An anchor no covencraft could dull. That was the last secret of it. The completed bond was the one thing their magic could never touch. It was why they'd had to bury the mates before the bonds could form. They had never been strong. They had only ever been early. "You murdered my wife," Dane said quietly. "To feed a hole you dug in me yourself. You stole 20 years of a child's life. You have been unmaking my house since before I was crowned." He stood over her. "And you did all of it in the dark, because your kind only ever worked in the dark, on the buried and the hidden, and the small, and you have just watched the smallest, most hidden woman in Aldmere stand up in the light and break your whole life's work with one sentence." His voice dropped. "There is nothing left of your covens but you." Tuvin. The beta was already there, and the guards behind him, and it was done without ceremony and without cruelty, which, Solene thought, was its own kind of justice, for a woman who had spent her life making cruelty look like arrangement. Sethra did not go quietly, but she went, and then it was over, and the deep hall was just a cold stone room again, and Solene's legs, finally, entirely gave out. Dane caught her before she reached the floor. "Of course he did. I've got you," he said, and his voice broke on it. He sank down with her, cradling her against his chest, and she could feel through the bond the sheer force of what he was feeling. Relief and grief and disbelief, all tangled, and under it, threaded through all of it, the wound that even this had not yet healed. She reached up and laid her hand along his jaw, the way he'd once laid his against her cheek. "You didn't fail, Malus," she said softly. "You have to hear it now, with the bond open. So you know it's true and not just kind. You couldn't have saved her, because it was never a thing you could have seen coming. It was murder, dressed as chance, arranged by a hand you didn't know was in the room. The guilt you've carried for 4 years, the guilt that was turning you, it was put there on purpose, to break you. It was never yours." She felt him shudder. "And here's the part that frees you. Malus was never the bond you were dying without. You loved her. You grieve her. Keep that. It's yours. But she was a wife you chose, not the mate you were made for. They stole that one out of your reach before you were old enough to want her. You never lost your true mate, Dane. You were only never allowed to find her. There was never any impossible second. There was only ever me, locked in a corner, so your wolf would spend its whole life reaching for a door that wouldn't open." She pressed her forehead to his. "You are not a monster who buries the women he loves, Dane. You're a man who was hunted by something patient enough to make you believe you were. There's a difference." Her thumb brushed his cheek, and it came away wet. "One of them means you deserve to be alone in the dark. The other means you were lied to, and I would know. I spent 20 years believing the first one about myself." For a long moment, the ruthless Alpha King of Aldmere said nothing at all. He only held her and shook, and let 4 years of manufactured grief break open and pour out of him against her shoulder, the way she'd let hers pour out on an attic floor when she was 11. Except she had cried alone, and he was not alone, and that she was beginning to understand was the whole of the difference between surviving a thing and healing from it. "I don't know how to put it down," he admitted, wrecked into her hair. "I've carried it so long I don't remember how to stand without it." "I know," Celine said. "We'll figure it out." She felt herself smile against him, tired and cracked open, and for the first time in her whole erased life, entirely here. "I'm good with numbers. And you're a king who likes to know the true count of things, not the easy one." She pressed her wet cheek to his. "So here's the true one. You're not a monster. I'm not nothing. And there are 42 beams in your bedchamber, and I was wrong about that too, and I intend to be here long enough to be wrong about a great many more." She felt him laugh, that rough, rusty, surprised sound, even through the tears. Above them, high in the walls of duskhold, the first gray light of dawn was coming through the arrow slits, and for the first time in 4 years, when it reached the king, it did not find a man drowning. It found 2 people, holding on, above the waterline. The curse of it, because Celine came to think of it as a curse, whatever the lorists called it, did not lift all at once. Healing never does. There were still bad nights. Dane still woke, reaching for a grief that had become a habit, still had mornings when the old belief crept back and whispered that he was a danger to everything he loved. But now there was someone beside him who knew the exact shape of that particular lie because she had one just like it, and she would take his face in her hands in the dark and count the true number of things with him until the tide went back down. "You didn't fail her. You're not nothing. There are 42 beams. It always worked, eventually. That was the thing about carrying it together. They found it never got heavier and it very slowly got light." The court did not know what to do with her, at first. A scentless ledger keeper in a gray dress, raised up overnight to stand at the king's right hand. It was not what anyone had envisioned, and the whispers followed her down every corridor. But the whispers had followed her all her life, and she found, to her private amusement, that they bothered her not at all now, because for the first time, the whispers saw her. You cannot be overlooked and gossiped about at once, and she had spent 20 years starving for so much as a glance. They mated properly, in the sight of the whole realm, on a bright cold morning in the great hall of Duskhold, the same hall where a girl in grey had once stood in a line of jeweled daughters and prayed to be passed over. Soline stood in the center of it this time, and no one passed her over. She wore grey, in the end. She'd been offered silks in every color of the treasury and had chosen grey on purpose, because grey had been the color of her hiding, and she wanted to stand up in it, in front of everyone, and make it the color of her being seen instead. Dane understood without being told. He always did. Now that was what the bond was. She was learning, not magic exactly. Just the end of being alone inside your own head. They'll grow used to you, he murmured against her temple that night, holding her close in the quiet of their chambers, the connecting door long since bricked over because they had stopped, some weeks ago, pretending they needed 2 rooms. He said, "Who is unreasonably fond of a woman he can no longer find in a crowd, only because she refuses to hide in one? Let them argue about it," Celine said. "I've decided I'm done being a thing people arrange." She settled back against his chest, and his arm came around her, warm and certain. And somewhere out in the dark of Duskhold, no wolf howled at all, because there was nothing left in the king for the dark to feed on. "Good night, Dane." "Good night," said the Alpha King, who slept now, whole and unafraid beside the mate the whole world had tried to make him forget. "My Soline." And in the morning, the light came through the curtains and found them both still there, still holding on, no fog waiting, no tide rising, no one forgotten,